Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment, and this is session number 55. Today we're going to finish up this first section of the remainder of the book of Romans. You remember that book, we got into our sonship orientation in Romans 8, 14, and 15. Romans 8, 16 to 39 was broken into three parts. That first part, these are your three parts to your sonship establishment. The first one is chapter 8, verses 16 to 25. The second one is chapter 8, verses 26 to 27. And the last is chapter 8, verses 28 to 39. We're going to finish this one up today, and we're going to get in the second session into the second part of your sonship establishment. Don't go to the PowerPoint. Is it not hooked up? Does somebody know? Ron, do you know how to do that? Okay, while he's doing that, let me just read it to you. And by the way, I'll explain now. There's a couple of reasons why you don't have notes sent to you. One of them is our internet out there has been down, not just ours, but the Windstream internet out there has been down now for about 4 days. And so we didn't have internet. So if you sent me anything, I haven't seen it. The second part is the second session today, you would not have gotten anyway, because I need to probe you a little bit and find out where your thinking is. And if I'd sent you the notes ahead of time, you'd already known the answers. I didn't need you to do that. So this worked. It just so happened this is going to work out perfectly. So Romans chapter 8, look at verse 23. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. And previously we saw that there were two types of groaning. There's the groaning that the creature is doing as he groaneth and travaileth in pain. Remember the whole creation together until now. And they are earnestly expecting that deliverance. But the groaning that we're doing is not groaning under the bondage of corruption like the creature. We are under the bondage of corruption, but our groan is for this right here, groaning within ourselves, waiting for the adoption. It's that earnest desire to get that glorified body and go to work with our Father. And listen, this is a checkpoint in your sonship. You encountered one back up here in chapter 8, verses 14 and 15, and that was the checkpoint of the cry of Abba, Father. And when you did that, you started moving into your sonship establishment, and now right here in verse 23, you're going to encounter the next checkpoint, and that is that proper groan to say, I just really I'm waiting to get out there and go to work with my Father. But now, when I say that, you understand that the groaning that you're doing to get out there and go to work with your Father does not preclude your sonship education. In other words, you're going to have to know what to do, and so you need this education. When I was in Bible college, studying as a preacher boy, I couldn't wait to get my first church and go to work. And as a matter of fact, I was so wanting to do that, I actually didn't value the things that I could have been learning, and I didn't realize how much some of those things were going to come into play later, when I actually got into them. I just wanted to get out there and do it, get out there and do it. And we talked about it as preacher boys do all the time, and that kind of, but my immaturity was really hurting my ability to patiently wait. And if you had said to me, if someone else had said, well, I'm being patient, I'm going through this, and then I would have thought, you don't want to do it very badly. But the truth of the matter is, those two go hand in hand. Wanting to go to work with your Father and wanting to get this education are not antithetical. They're supposed to work together. So the measure of the groan is not to say, I don't care about my education, just let me get up there and go to work. That's not how you measure if this doctrine is effectually working in you. But there is a way to measure it. And that's what I want to talk to you about now. It is good that we want to go to work in the creature, but it's just as good to say, until I get this education, I'm going to wait. And I know what you're thinking. It's up to me to get you down the road. Yep. Okay, just making sure you were awake. The measure for you, don't thank her. Okay. Yeah, that's what you're thinking. Okay. The measure for your desire is not, I want to go to work as compared to getting your education, but it is compared to something else. It is compared to the other groaning that may take place in you. For instance, if you're under the bondage of corruption, and you are, maybe you're young and you don't feel the effects of that so much. Later, you will feel, some of us will feel more of those effects than others, but eventually we'll all feel those effects, because I'm going to tell you, if the blessed hope doesn't happen, we're all going to die. I mean, this body is going to, something's going to happen. That's just the way that's the way that works. Well, here's what I'm saying. If you're saying, I'm groaning for the redemption of my body so I can get out of these aches and pains, those verses haven't done the work that they're supposed to do. The groaning is not to get out of the aches and pains. The groaning is for the new body so you can go to work. I'm not saying you shouldn't know that you're going to get out of those aches and pains. You will. But if that's the driving groan, then these verses have not done their effectual work. And that's the measure. That's the measure to know if you're ready to go to the second part of your sonship establishment. And now this whole section ought to start working together toward the goal of this, and that is making verse 18, Romans chapter 8, verse 18, a living reality. Now, we're going to look at that, but first let's look at this next verse. That was 23. Now, verse 24, for we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. Now I want to talk to you about that highlighted phrase, for we are saved by hope. This is not talking about being saved from the debt and penalty of your sin. This is not talking about being saved as in justified unto eternal life. Somebody tell me, what is this being saved from? In the context... okay, well, you know what? There is a measure of that. But remember, I take you back to verse 18, where Paul said, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Because you are going to experience those sufferings. You're not immune from them, and God is not going to stand between you and them. And what's going to give you the endurance to get through those? Well, let me get to that. It's a great question, so let me get to that. When you're saved by hope, that hope is of such a nature that when the sufferings come your way, you are not overwhelmed by those sufferings, and you can patiently endure them. Everybody with me there? That means that instead of you being anxious and upset or depressed, or, when the sufferings come, and some people get so overwhelmed, they're completely destroyed by the sufferings of this present time. They lose a child. Terrible thing when you outlive your children, but you know what? Some people don't recover from that. The only thing for them that would have helped them would have been this doctrine. Because there are plenty of substitutes, but they don't do what this doctrine does. And what I'm trying to say is that it's not that you won't suffer when those sufferings come. You will suffer, but they won't have the effect on you. That's what you're being saved from. The effect that it would normally have on someone that didn't have this doctrine. Now take a look at verse 18. It's the one I quoted for you. Paul said, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. And there's two ways that you're going to look at that, where it is the suffering versus the glory. And there are two aspects of that Paul puts forth that makes that a living reality for him. And so I want to talk about those two aspects. In fact, one of them is the glory aspect. The other is the benefit aspect. And we're going to talk about both of those today. According to verse 18, Paul said he had come to the conclusion that no matter what he went through, and by the way, did Paul go through very much? Whatever he went through, the suffering was not worthy to be compared with the glory that he was going to get as a result of that suffering. And that confident assurance, folks, becomes your hope, because it's going to be just as true for you as it was for Paul. There is a glory waiting for you. And it is of such a nature that no matter what you go through, even if that suffering costs you your life, it can't crawl on the scale of comparison with the glory. Now I'm going to give you something better than that in just a moment. But when Paul says that he reckoned it, I want to make sure that you have that down. It means not just that he counted it to be true. Let me just put that in here. When Paul says, for I reckon, he is saying, I count it to be so true that it is now the basis for my conduct and actions. Because there are lots of things that you may think are true, but your behavior doesn't change in view of it, right? I mean, you know, as a kid, if you don't brush your teeth, you might get a cavity. You get a cavity, you go to the dentist, he has to drill. It's very uncomfortable. Does that mean he's going to go brush his teeth? No, just because he knows it doesn't impact him. But when you reckon something, it means now you are basing your conduct on that truth. And Paul began to do that very thing. That's why in 2 Corinthians, in chapter 4, Paul brings the Corinthians right back to Romans doctrine. Now look what he says here. And by the way, I can take you to Corinthians, because what you have sitting over in Corinthians is nothing more than the corrective doctrine for people who didn't get it in Romans. So we're not getting ahead of ourselves over here. He's going to bring us right back. And here's what he says in verse 17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Now, do you remember verse 18? I reckon that the sufferings are not worthy to be compared with the glory. But when he talks to the Corinthians about it, he says, those sufferings, which he considers to be light and momentary, work for him. Now, if something works for you, it's a benefit, isn't it? It works for you a far more. Do you look at all these words piled up here? He could have just said an exceeding weight of glory, or a more exceeding weight, but he went a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Now, Paul knew that that's the way those sufferings were. In the final analysis, here's what he said. All those things that happened to me, they were light afflictions. The amount of time I had to endure them were momentary. But what they produced was that. That is what they produced. And even though they seemed to be bad when they were happening, they were producing something good. So his whole attitude, his actions were all based on the confident assurance that verse 18 was absolutely true. And because he reckoned that to be true, it became his hope. Do you see? That became his hope. So when you're going, let's put this where the rubber meets the road for a moment. This can't be abstract for you. And it's better for me to talk to you about it now than the day you're going to go through it. Some of you are there now. But here's the point I'm making. You really do have to see this the way the Apostle Paul sees it, so that when these things happen, we had a lady in the church in Monahans who lost an adult daughter a year ago this month. We just buried a second daughter who died right out of the blue. Had no idea that it was going to happen. I'm going to tell you something. If she didn't have this doctrine, this would be a whole different ball game, and she would tell you that. So I'm not talking out of school when I say this, but I'm going to tell you, if you don't have this doctrine, it may well be that one day you may encounter something that is of such a nature that it will overwhelm you. This doctrine will save you from that and become your hope. Because no matter what it is, if you can reckon that this suffering isn't worthy to be compared with something you're going to receive when you get up there, that does become a hope for you. It's even better than that, but that hope took Paul through all kinds of sufferings, and they're listed in Scripture. We're not going to go back and look at those. He could patiently endure every single one of them because he knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that those sufferings would pale in comparison to the glory. I'm going to give you one more. Not only pale in comparison, the Bible says you'll forget about them and they won't even come into mind anymore. That must be some glory, huh? He's trying to give you a picture when he says this. You want to know what the glory, and by the way, we're going to have to do something to tell you a little bit about that glory, because the glory is the first aspect of your hope. That there really is something there. Now, and by the way, the glory you don't get until it's all over. But that glory is based on that suffering that takes place now. And you're supposed to have the same confident assurance that the Apostle Paul had. You can base your life and base your actions on that truth, and you can live your life in accordance with Romans 8:18, it's going to be of such a nature that when the Bible says it won't come into, the former things won't come into mind anymore. It must be pretty great, isn't it? By the way, the thing is rigged. I wish I could find a different term to describe what I'm after, because that kind of implies something sneaky and underhanded. But it's rigged, because you can't lose this thing. If something kills you here, you wake up there. Do you understand? For a believer, there's nothing that can happen to you here, nothing that isn't going to be undone. It isn't going to be undone. I know it's not quite the same. I'm not trying to make you think it is. But if you ever watch one of your kids in a play, and he's in a sword fight, and he dies in the sword fight, you don't fall out of your chair weeping because you lost your son. You know why? Because when the curtain pulls, he's going to get up and walk off stage. I got news for you. No matter what kills you, when the curtain pulls, you're going to get up. God's not looking at it like, oh my gosh, Mike died. Okay, I know all the angels will be going like, yay. But it's not over. It's not over. You can't lose this. This is the amazing part of this. That's why Paul talks about we don't sorrow as those that have no hope. They're not getting up off the stage. Or they're going to a worse stage. That's not how it's going to be for us. So, Paul calls these sufferings light. He calls them but for a moment. He endures them because he reckoned that they were producing something so marvelous and so grand that it'll make the memory of these things vanish away. By the way, that's not the only thing we'll forget about. Do you know we'll forget all about the adversary? You will not say, way out in the ages to come, you're not going to turn around and go, remember when we used to talk about the wiles of the devil? And that's not what you're going to be involved in. Is so glorious, those things won't even come into your mind. He's going to be forgotten, which is a perfect justice for him. The one that wanted to be in charge of it all is now going to be gone. Well, huh? Well, yeah, he is. Yeah. And so you may here go through heartache that exceeds the endurance that men can produce, but the pain of a debilitating disease that in the end, in spite of all the medical advances of our day, winds up taking your life, or anything else. I'm just trying to think of whatever it might be. You'll never go through anything that is worthy to even get on the scale to be compared with this glory. That's how great this glory is. 1 Corinthians 2:7. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom. Look what he tells them, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. So even though this thing was a secret and was a mystery, and not even the angels knew about it, God had planned this whole thing for our glory. Now that's verse 7. Take a look here in verse 9. But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. That's in the context of that glory. Now, when I was a preacher boy, they used to tell me, you can't know what heaven's like because the Bible says, eye hath not seen and ear hath not heard. It wasn't talking about heaven. It's talking about the glory that God has reserved for us. Now, you think about what that means for a moment. I don't want to stop and do a word study on this, but that means that the glory that God has designed for you, not only has no man ever seen it, let me ask you this, has the world ever lauded glory on any of its people? Have they ever built monuments to them and written books about them and, or as the Vikings say, sang songs, and all that kind of bit? They did all of that, did they not? The Bible says you've never seen this kind of glory. You've never seen it. Here's the next thing. You've never even heard about this glory. Then he takes it one more step. It's never even entered into the heart of man what this glory is like. In your wildest imagination, you have never conceived of what's waiting for you. Does that make you anticipate that just a little bit? I mean, a whole lot. Okay. This glory, and that I just, you should just go back when you get your notes. You should go back and look at that and look at those verses. But now let me show you the next one. That's verse 10. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. You see, here's the part that nobody wanted to talk about when they say, oh, the Bible says, eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard. You don't know anything about it. Well, they didn't read the next verse because the next verse says, well, now the Spirit's revealed it. And he has. And now you're going to get told about that glory. Because it doesn't do you any good, does it, for God to say, oh, there's a glory up there. What's it like? Well, I can't talk about it. But you're going to like it. It'll be big. This glory is of such a nature that no one has ever conceived of it. Now, you have to ask yourself, in this context, is he talking about the air of God, the glory associated with that, or is he talking about the glory associated with a son? How many of you say a son? How many of you say just an air of God? Okay. I'm not exaggerating when I'm not going to tell you. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not kidding you when I say that the glory that is waiting on you is going to make you forget all about your light affliction, which was but for a moment. You're not going to hold on to that. This is the first aspect of your hope that is going to allow you to patiently endure everything that comes your way. And by the way, that is what the first fruits of the Spirit are designed to produce. And I need to take you to a verse. Give me that next verse. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit. Now, instantly when you read that, your mind wants to run further over in your Bible to the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, remember all that? But this is the first fruits. And first fruits, as we talked about last time, is the initial thing that is produced. That's first fruits, okay? The first, it says, and not only they, talking about the whole creation, the creature and the earth, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit. Let me tell you what the first fruits of the Spirit are. It is this desire to get that glorified body and get up there and go to work with our Father. It's right there at the end. waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. That's what the first fruits are designed to produce. In other words, the very first thing that the Spirit of God, in his function as you learned about him in your sonship orientation, as he functions as the Spirit of adoption. Yes, he did plenty of things when you got saved, but in the role of Spirit of adoption, right? For you not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the Spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. In the very first thing he wants to produce in you is an enthusiasm about your Father's business and your role in it. And if you get that enthusiasm, you're groaning for that body, not so I can get out of my aches and pains. You're groaning for that body so you could get up there and go to work. It's a different mindset. And so that's what that Spirit, that's the first fruits of the Spirit. This is actually a qualifier. We who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we groan within ourselves waiting for the adoption. Guess what? If you don't have the first fruits of the Spirit, what? You're not groaning for that glorified body. Well, you might be groaning for it like, oh, my back hurts. I just wish I had my glorified body. But you're not groaning the way this is talking about. Do you see what I'm saying? The first fruits is the way you know if this thing has been produced in you. Is that what you're after? Is that really, because what you're going to find out is the sufferings are producing a glory. Now, that doesn't mean you're going out of your way to look for them, but it does mean when they come, you're looking at them very differently than you would be without this doctrine. Now, that desire to be involved in your Father's business turns into a hope, and that is the hope that allows you to get through the sufferings of this present time. And that's the checkpoint. As I told you before, the first one was the cry of Abba, Father. Now it's the groaning for the redemption of your body. And by the way, since we're on that phrase, and this is the place to put it here, there are three stages. You've got those charts in front of you, right? You have three levels to that sonship education. The first one is when you are, this terminology is not precise, but it'll get my point across for now. When you are being called and educated as a son, there's a formal, remember when we talked about this back in orientation, there's a formal ceremony in which a father looks out among his children, he finds one, he offers him this chance to be adopted, the son says yes, then there's a formal ceremony that's called, and it's public, and there's a ring attached to that, and a robe attached to that, and a declaration about the father's business. He moves from childhood to adulthood, all that kind of business. And that is called his adoption. It's the adoption ceremony. That's exactly what it is. But when that education is over, and now the father is no longer looking over his shoulder and making sure that he's doing the work right, but there comes a time when he moves now into a position in the father's business as I don't know how to say this better, a full partner with his Father. He can make his own decisions. He's been trained. He's been educated. That part is over. And now he actually, not that he never labored with his father before, but now he's laboring in the capacity of a full business partner with the Father, with the absolute trust of the Father that he could send him anywhere to represent the business in any way, and it's going to be done right. Everybody with me there? And that's a different position. He's no longer just learning the ropes. And that also is called the adoption. Now, there is a third part. It is not called the adoption. Does anyone know why that third level is not about your adoption? Because now you're functioning as a father with your own son. That would be his adoption. Now you're functioning as a father. Because both of these are rightfully called adoption, Look at what the verse says. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. Which one is he referring to? Which adoption is he referring to? Is he talking about we're waiting for the redemption of our body? Does that happen when you're called and you're starting to be educated? Or does that happen when you're now going to begin to genuinely labor? That's the one, isn't it? So you know what he's doing? When he uses that, the reason he says adoption, and then he qualifies it, to wit, the redemption of our body, he's telling you, this is the one. This is the part now that I'm talking about here. And so that way, you don't confuse that with what's going on back here. You're not going to be doing that labor when you first start to get educated. All right, back to Romans 8:24. For we are saved by hope. We've already seen that phrase. But hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? Let's talk about that verse just for a moment. He's saying, if the thing you're hoping for is now a present reality for you, you don't hope for it anymore, do you? If you've got it right now, it's no longer a hope, right? Well, that seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? So why have that there? That caused me a little bit of searching. Why is he telling me something? Whether you're saved or lost, everybody knows that. Here's what you're being reminded of. Don't get to thinking that any part of your hope is going to become a reality until the other side of the redemption of your body. If you're not careful, you'll get off track with the policy of evil, which will try to make you think, you know what, I'm going to get some of this benefit on this side of my body being redeemed, and you're not. And if you get talked into that, suddenly what you thought was working isn't working anymore, and now you're wondering what in the world's going wrong. This is the reminder that if you have it, you're not hoping for it anymore, and this is called your hope. So look at verse 25. But if we hope for that we see not, if we're hoping for that thing that we don't yet have, see it, you understand what he's saying? It's not right here in front of us now. Then do we with patience what? Wait for it. And that is the important part. Now, let's talk about this patience part of that. Let's see. Well, before I do that, let me make just a couple of comments about this. This education does give you a hope, but you need to understand this. As the longer you go through the education, the greater that hope becomes. That hope will increase. And how will that happen? Because you'll know more and more about your Father's business and more about your part in it, and you'll see more and more of the things that make that a certainty and a surety. And that hope is just going to expand the further you go through the curriculum. Let's see. Give me that next phrase. Give me the next one. And one more. No, one more. That's it. Then do we with patience wait for it. Here's what I want to show you about patience. If you look up patience, we think of these terms: endurance, tolerance, lack of complaint, persistence, fortitude. That's patience. I thought it was interesting what Charles Smith wrote, so give me that next one. The opposite of endurance is exhaustion. I thought, now that makes real sense to me. But remember the virtue we're after here. Patient endurance. So the opposite of endurance is exhaustion. The opposite of patience is repining and irritability. You can endure impatiently, he said. Is that true? Yes, it is. The enduring man can be in exasperation. The patient man suffers and is calm. Now that tells you a lot, doesn't it? So I looked this up in George Crabb's book on synonyms, and here's what he says. Patience applies to any troubles or pains whatever, small or great, abstaining from all complaint or indication of what one suffers. O brother, then do we with patience wait for it, right? If we do not endure with an easy mind and without the disturbance of our looks and words, and the Lord kind of make reference to this. He said, when you fast and, you're going through that, wash your face and don't make yourself look like, just guess what I'm going through, right? Without the disturbance of our looks and words, we have not patience. It is possible to have patience without endurance. Now, they're both coming to the same conclusion. They're talking about it a little different way, but they're both coming to the same conclusion. And here's what you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have patient endurance. And that way, when you find Paul talking about all the things that he went through, he's not looking for your sympathy or your empathy. He's not doing that. You know what he's doing? He's telling you about it so that you'll realize anything you can go through, he's probably gone through too. And if he could go through it that way, you can go through it that way. Because the doctrine that did that work in him is the same doctrine sitting in this book that is waiting to do that work in you. Now, let's talk about the benefit aspect, this second one. This is what we need to do next. There is value. I know that it doesn't look like it when you're going through suffering, and you may say to yourself, well, I got a bad report at the doctor's office, and, I'm got some real physical troubles. Okay. And I'm not saying that you're supposed to jump up and down and, act like that's just a great thing, but you are supposed to understand that there is a value that is being added to you by going through these sufferings. Because by going through them, listen carefully, something gets accomplished in you that could not be accomplished any other way. Good times never produce the endurance that bad times do. In fact, you know a verse about this, and we've already covered it in the book of Romans. Can I just quote it and take you back? Tribulation worketh. Oh, do you remember when we were back there looking at that? As he was segueing out of justification in Romans 5, getting ready to put you into sanctification, he does this. Tribulation worketh patience. And patience, endurance. These are not words that you should have suddenly encountered for the first time. He's actually already set these up in your thinking as he was moving you into your sanctification. So you're supposed to patiently endure, and you're getting that message here all along. If you don't, here's what will happen. It's what normally happens. We moan and groan about our situation. We complain about our lot in life. We ask God why, and we question him. And that's what people do. They think God's omnipotent. He can do anything he wants to do. Why did he allow this to happen? See, they don't understand what God's doing in the dispensation of grace. There was even a book that got put out about it, and everybody, including me, preached sermons on it, called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? I always loved Rick's answer about that. He said there are no good people, so just forget that premise. And that's pretty true, but what you're thinking is, how come the worst among us don't always have the worst problems among us? And sometimes the people who seem to be very generous and nice and go to church and all that kind of business, sometimes they suffer the worst calamities. And we wonder about that. And you know where that wondering comes from? From thinking that God is standing between us and those troubles. He's not prescribing those troubles, but if they come along, he's going to give you a glory in exchange for them that will make you forget all about them. And that's when it's all said and done, when it's all over. But right now, you know what you're being done? You know what's happening to you? You're being trained for your work in the creature. And going through these sufferings is part of that training. Now, you may be asking yourself, how in the world is this part of my training? I don't get that. Well, when I was a kid in school, I played on the basketball team. And when we would have practice, we did these runs on the court. You lined up underneath the goal, and you ran as fast as you could to the free throw line, bent down and touched it, ran back and touched that end line, and ran back to the midcourt line and touched it, and ran back without slowing down as much as you could, touched that original line, ran to the opposite free throw line, touched that line, ran all the way back, touched the beginning line, ran to the other end of the court and touched that line, and somewhere between there and the way back, you fell down dead. And we ask ourselves, why is he so mad all the time? He must be angry with us because he makes us do these things. And and we would, in our ignorance, we talked about it. We would go, that didn't help my shot. It didn't help me play defense. It didn't help me run a play. It didn't help me learn how to pass the ball. I don't even have the ball. I'm just running. You may not have played basketball. Does anybody know what was being done here? He was trying to give us endurance. And the only way to get endurance was, guess what? Push your levels of endurance. Now, if he said that to us, if we would have had the right attitude, if we hadn't been kids and immature, you know what our attitude should have been? I'm running these things whether coach tells me to or not. And there have been a few people in this world who have become really good at what they're doing because while everybody else is looking at the minutes to wait until practice is over, they stay way beyond that. And they do way more than it was ever expected of them. And they're the people that not only become the star athletes or the concert pianist or the whatevers, they are the people at the tops of their fields because they give more than they had to give because they understood that that was only achievable that way. And if a lost guy can just look at sports that way, surely a son who's had this explained to him about sufferings can now begin to look at sufferings about preparing him now for something he's going to do in the creature, and he's going to need that skill. And so the here and now of it is, you're being trained in a skill, and you've got to remind yourself to think of it that way, because that's not going to be the knee-jerk reaction. The knee-jerk reaction is, oh, why me? Why couldn't it happen to Loopy? Because we all think that. No. Instead of saying that, you're going to look at this and say, I'm getting trained. I'm getting trained. Now, just like we were, right now you may be saying, I don't see how that translates into working in the creature. We didn't see how that translated into our basketball skills. But believe me, if you can't run up and down the court in basketball, if after your second trip you're standing at the sideline wheezing, gasping for breath, you're no good to the team. By the way, that works in every sport. How many boxers have I seen that had a devastating knockout punch, and when it got into the middle to late rounds, the guy ran completely out of gas and got pulverized because he didn't have endurance? You're going to need endurance. Now, you're not told why here, but you are being told that suffering, folks, is a crucible in which you are being trained for something you're going to need when you get out there. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do to begin reckoning this, just like your apostle did. When you go through that, you're going to start saying, you know what, this is my training, and I'm not just going to endure it because I can endure without being patient. I'm going to, with patience, wait. Whatever it takes to get this education, whatever I have to go through, I'm going to patiently endure it because, believe me, what's on the other side is more than worth it. Doesn't that change the way you look at what's going to happen? Here's what we used to think. Well, we're going to go to heaven. What are we going to do? I don't know, play volleyball. I don't know. Now you're thinking, I'm going to get this redeemed body. I'm going to get up in the creature, and I'm going to do. Your thinking's already changing about this. Now you have to start changing the way you think about sufferings here and now, and understanding that's the reason that you're. Can you imagine the coach looking at these guys running up and down the court, feeling sorry for them, and going, well, I know y'all don't enjoy, you know what, just stop. I tell you what, everybody just, everybody just sit in a chair. We're going to bring lazy boys in, and we're not going to run anymore in practice. I just love you guys so much. I'm just going to let y'all say, you know what? They're going to be the worst team ever. I mean, the blind school killed them, 40-0. At least they could run. That's I don't know where that came from. I don't know. There's a dark, deep crevice in there that stuff just comes out of. If he is for their ultimate good, he's going to require that of them. Now, your Father's not requiring suffering. He's not requiring a bad medical diagnosis or the loss of a loved one. He's not requiring that you've hurt your back or some guy rammed you from the back and your neck has never been the same. He didn't require, he's not prescribing any of that. But if you get it, stop complaining about it. If you get it, see it as the training ground to patiently endure it unto his honor and glory, because you're going to be given a glory in exchange for that that's going to make that all go away, even in your memory. And right now, you should be saying to yourself, I'm getting a benefit now. This is your training. Do you just really want to be trained for the easy stuff? Okay. Had an illustration there, but I don't have time for it. When I worked for a medical equipment company, I interviewed folks, and all this guy and this guy, the HR lady said, I really think this is the guy you need to hire. I said, I don't think he's any good. She said, he's really the guy we ought to hire. Believe me, I've been doing HR work for a long time. I said, okay, fine. I don't see it, but okay. And so we hired him. We had a conference room. And I told him, and I said, hey, we're having a conference in here. So what I need you to do is, in that closet in the conference room, there's a projector. Make sure that table is cleaned off. The projector's set up on the table, plugged in, ready to go, and the screen is set up. The screen projector in that closet. He said, okay. Well, I'm going down for the meeting a little bit later, and when I walk in, I realize there's no projector and there's no screen set up. So I go to the phone and I dial the guy, and when he gets on the phone, he goes, yeah. And I say, where's the screen and the projector? He goes, well, that door was locked. Do-do, 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 do-do. I said, did you ask anybody for a key? Well, no. A real self-starter, this guy. Is that the kind of son we want to be? Don't give me anything I've really got to work at. By the way, sonship, you do understand. I think you do, but you understand. You can't just show up on a Tuesday every now and then and get sonship. You've got to go home and look at this. Yes? Now, I'm not saying you have to come here. I'm saying you could go to Monahan's. No, but you've got to look at this, don't you? This can't be something that you just flippantly treat like, well, if it's convenient this week, I'll think about that won't work. I'm not trying to make it hard on you. I'm telling you how it is. You're not going to be put into a job you can't handle. And if you want that work with you, now, if it's not a big deal to you, I actually wonder why you're here. Because believe me, you'll have much more fun at the bowling alley than this. Okay, now I just alienated everybody that bowls. There's 100 things you'd enjoy more. But if you're after sonship, and I know you are, I know that you're not just doing it here. I know some of you are involved in groups other than here. I know that some of you read those notes and watch those things over and over. You read those notes over. I know you do. So I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but this changes not just the way you view the creature. This doesn't just change your view of what happens when you go to heaven. This changes your whole life. You're going to now view your whole life differently. You're going to view sufferings differently. And when they're happening, when someone comes along and says, oh, poor you, and you got that feeling like, thank God, because that's what I was after, this isn't working in you. What you need to be thinking is, I'm being trained. And the training here is to patiently endure. And I've been given two things that help me do that. The promise of a glory that is so great that no matter what happens now, it's all going to be undone and traded for glory. And the other thing is, I'm getting a skill now that I've got to have when I get there. Now, when you get those things there, and you understand everything in your life that is happening is providing training for that. And God is going to do this in other areas. For instance, in your family, when you talk about how to interact with your family, and He's going to teach you how to do this. He's not just throwing it out there and say, good luck with it. You're actually going to learn about it. But when He talks about how to interact with your family, you're actually going to see that you're going to go through things with your family that are meant to hone and sharpen a sonship skill that you likely won't get in any or at least many other places. Because our family tends to be able to get to us when total strangers can't. Not just that, here's your marriage. Same thing. Your church. Same thing. Listen carefully. This group, there's something coming in the future. If you don't nail this down with the sufferings now, you're not going to handle what's on its way. Telling you now. Not trying to scare you with it. I'm telling when we get there and you see it, you'll say, you know what? You told us. I'm telling you, we need to get this. That's why it's in your establishment. He doesn't wait till you're over in your education to give it to you. You've got to have this now. Some of those things that are in the church can only be done within the framework of a local assembly. Why? Because you are all part of a single body. Yes, there is the body of Christ, but here is a body. Here is a body. What do I got left here? Okay, look. Let me take 2 minutes and do this. We are coming to a place where you're going to understand that within the framework of a church, there are two kinds of offices. They're the kinds you're used to, of pastor and deacon and that kind of stuff. But there is another kind of office. And it is an office for every member of the body of Christ. And if a church is properly functioning, every member is going to be shown all of those offices, and you are going to choose of your own volition. Remember in the old days we talked about spiritual gifts? I wonder what God gave me. You misunderstood what was going on with that. It's not what He gave you. You're a son. You know what that means? You have liberty in decision making. He's going to let you choose. And not everybody's personality is the same. Not everybody wants to do the same thing. It's easy for me to get up here and flap my gums for 45 minutes. For some people, that's a death sentence. They don't want to do that. They usually don't want me to do it because this is not that great. But the thing is, everybody's got a different part. And we're all going to choose that part. But when it's said and done, all of those offices will be taken up. No, it's not. Don't get scared and thinking, oh no, I'm going to be brought up front and made to account for being the foot of the body or something. Now you're not. But my point is this: only when every part of the body is assembled together can this body properly function. If you could keep it alive, my feet are in Miami, my head is in Monahans, my hands are in Glen Rose, my legs are out in San Francisco, you know what? I'm very limited with what I can do with any part of that body. Very limited. But only when the entire body is assembled can it now do what it was designed to do. And guess what? When it comes to this, and I'm not talking about a formal church. A church is just a an assembly of folks. Only when we all come together can we ever then accomplish what creating this was meant to accomplish. Because when we live here, part of it goes to Fort Worth and part of it goes to, I don't know all those little places over there. I wanted to say Saginaw, but y'all don't live there anymore. Part of it goes to Dublin and part of it goes to Hyco, and now I'm going to leave somebody out and you're offended. And we're going to go back to West Texas. And you know what? And when you spread the body out like that, we can't function. When this body comes together, only then can we do what can be done by a fully functioning, complete body that has all its members. And you know what the shame of that is? Every church meets every Sunday not even knowing what it is they're supposed to do when they all meet together. Not only does that never get done, but it doesn't even occur to them that until that body is fully assembled, that can't get done. And as soon as they're gone for those couple of hours on Sunday, it can't get done until the next week. That ought to bother us a little bit to say, what in the world is that? And how come, like me, I've been going to church all my life and nobody's ever talked to me about that? Except my apostle who wrote it in the Bible, but you don't want to bother with that. Because that's a big book. Lord knows he wrote a bunch of them. So, do you see what I'm saying? Suffering is part of your training ground, and it's meant to produce something that is necessary for you to possess when you get into the creature. Now, on the timer at 3 minutes left, is there anything about this first section, specifically in the first section? I know there's a bunch he didn't tell you. I understand. When the creature's travailing and pain together now, what kind of pain is the creature feeling, and how is it feeling that pain when it's that? You don't need that in order for this doctrine to work. I'm not talking about those kinds of questions. I'm talking about what we've been talking about in verses 16 to 25, where he started out talking to you about your heir of God inheritance, and then your joint heir inheritance, and that if you suffer with him, you'll be glorified together with him. And the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in you. And the creature's up there earnestly expecting the day that you're going to be manifested so that you can deliver it, because it was made subject to vanity against its will. And not only that, but it was under the bondage of corruption, and not just the creature, but the whole creation is groaning and travailing in pain together until now. But we, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body, so we can get up there and do that. And there's a glory associated with that becomes our hope. And we're going to have that in such a nature, this suffering can't even be compared with it. And not only that, you're being equipped to get up there and do that job, so there is a present benefit right here and now to learn patient endurance. Is that it? Does anybody have a question about that? Because we're going to move to the next section, and I don't want to do that if you've got a gap. Rick? Yeah. Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. Yeah, endurance is what you do, and patience is how you do it. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, is everybody good? We'll take a break. We'll come back. No? The first fruits of the Spirit is the way you measure whether this is beginning to work in you the way that it is. If your desire is to get a new body so you can get out of the aches and pains of this life or whatever, then you don't have the first fruits of the Spirit. The first fruits of the Spirit are what they produce is a groaning to get that redeemed body so that I can work with my Father. That's the first thing he wants to produce, a desire for the Father's business and for your part in it. That's the first fruits. Everybody got that? Great question. Okay. All right, you're dismissed. Sharp 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. was talking about the creature suffering.